Hello everybody, thank you for coming back. It's our fifth and last presentation in the series. We're here for an hour till 10:30. My name is Chris Farmer from the Corporate Coach Group. We're here to answer a single question: how to get the best from ourselves and others. How to get the best from ourselves and others. I'm assuming the same things as last time. I'm assuming you've got the notes either in the paper form or in the electronic form. I will be referring to the notes, but I'd also be doing some ad hoc notes as well on my pad. So if you do have a pencil and a piece of paper, that would probably be helpful as well. But let's launch straight into it. We're here to answer this question: how can we get our best? How can we get the best from ourselves and others? Now, the best here means best performance. We need to get the best performance from colleagues, from customers, from suppliers, because we know that if we can get the best performance from other people, our lives are a lot easier. But we also know that we can't get the best from other people unless we're getting something close to the best from ourselves, because if we're not performing well, we can't get the best from other people. So the question is, how can we perform at our best? And the answer to that question is as you get older, learn and apply new knowledge. That's how we get to our best. As we get older, we should all learn and apply new knowledge, because every year on the planet we should be a little bit wiser than we were this time last year, because we've learned some new things. So on this course, we're talking about learning new things, or even just applying what we already know, but we don't always apply, you see. So this is what this course is about: it's applying knowledge. Now, as human beings, we use knowledge in conceptual form. We have concepts and ideas. And so this course is about presenting you with a set of ideas to help us improve our performance. Now, the first concept that we came across on this course was this. We called it SOS. We said that we think in layers, and we are affected by four things: what we do ourselves, what other people will do or won't do, what the system will do or won't do, and what the planet does, or Mother Nature. And what we said was we start with ourselves, because if we can work on ourselves and make ourselves better, we can then move out to the next level and help other people. And then you, me, we can build good systems, and then the systems that we build, we might be able to manage planet Earth, save planet Earth, or save us from planet Earth, depending on what the planet's doing. So we start with ourselves. That was the first idea that we presented. And then the big idea on the first day that we worked together, on day one, was the success formula, which is more complicated than the version I've got behind me, but essentially it's based upon 5 words: purpose, plan, action, feedback, change. Purpose, plan, action, feedback, change. We did that on the first day together. And then the second day, we picked out on the word planning, if you remember, and we did a whole section on prioritizing and planning. And then the third day, we talked about negative feedback and how to give people negative feedback in a constructive way. We called that constructive criticism, negative feedback. And then last time, we talked about how to change people's emotions when we're in negative times. Do you remember that? If you were here with us last time, we were talking about emotional management, because we know when we're in negative times or in times of change, people normally have a negative emotional response to negative feedback and change. So what we have to do is work with the emotions, and we talked about emotional management last time. But because this is the last presentation of the course, I'd like to start where we finish where we started, which is purpose, because the first part of the success formula is purpose, plan, action, feedback, change. So we're finishing at the beginning again. We're starting back where we're finishing where we started. We're right on the word purpose. So I'd like to draw your attention to a phrase: clarity of purpose. When you wake up in the morning, when I wake up in the morning, when we wake up in the morning, we've got a fundamental choice as to how we're going to operate our brains. And that choice really boils down to this: to be goal-focused and purposeful or not. To be goal-focused and purposeful or not. Now, the goal-focused and purposeful one is the one I wanted. because it sets us off onto the success formula: purpose, plan, action, feedback, change. Now, there are some people who wake up in the morning and they're not goal focused, they're not purposeful. Now, I call this the drifter mentality. The drifter mentality. This is our most basic choice: to be or not to be. To be or not to be, goal focused or drifter. You see, there's two states of mind. One is what I call laser sighted. You might know people who are laser sighted. It doesn't mean that they're any more intelligent than anyone else, and it doesn't mean that they're more educated than anyone else. They have that capacity, irrespective of their intelligence and their education, to set themselves on a path, and they go in straight lines. The person who I most associate to this characteristic is a friend of mine called Tom. And Tom is what I call a laser-sighted individual. He sets his goals and he goes. Now, there are other people who are more lackadaisical, shall we say. They don't set goals. They are drifters. They have a drifter-type mentality. They might even brag about it. They might even say, hey, why worry about tomorrow? You might be run over by a bus this evening, so we won't worry about tomorrow. Well, I'm not sure about that philosophy. Certainly it's no good as a business philosophy. We have to be goal focused. And the goal that we have is to add value to the marketplace. That's our goal. But I'd like to set up this conversation first of all with the difference between having a goal focused mentality and a drifter mentality. May I please ask you to look at page 5 in the notes? May I ask you to look at page 5 in the notes? I'm going to ask you about consequences. The question I'm trying to ask you is this: what are the painful consequences that anyone would suffer if they allowed themselves to get into the drifter mentality mode? They're drifters. They're educated people. They're nice people. They're intelligent people, but they don't have goals. They're drifting, waiting for things to happen. Now, what would be the painful long-term consequences that would befall anyone who falls into that mind state? Now, I've got 3 categories here: on their lifetime earning capacity, on their reputation with friends, and in terms of how they feel about themselves when they realize that they're not achieving goals after a couple of decades. So I'm just going to pause my presentation. My question is, what are the painful consequences which are associated to being a drifter mentality? I'll just pause my presentation for 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm wondering if anybody would like to speak up or type it in. We're looking for consequences. The consequences that would befall any human being if they fall into the trap of being a drifter mentality. Would anybody like to make a comment or to make a point?
Okay.
Nice and loud, please, Lindsay.
Alison.
Nice and loud.
Career stands still or even folds.
Perfect. The career stands still. Why? Because they're not even pushing themselves. They're hoping that they'll be noticed because they're so intelligent, but that's not enough. It's not enough to be intelligent. It's not enough to be educated. We must also be goal focused. Any more notes, Lindsay?
Yes, we have Frazina says static, lack of ambition and no drive.
Yes.
We've also got Krishna, they won't be able to make earning in long term. And Anesta says lost opportunity for career development.
Yes. So there's lots of painful associations to the word or words drifter mentality. So we're scrubbing drifter mentality off the list, and we're replacing it with clarity of purpose, goal focused mentality. I call them laser sighted individuals. Laser sighted individuals. Now what happens, what are the pleasurable associations to this type? What are the pleasurable associations? I've got here, what are the long-term pleasurable consequences, psychological, emotional and behavioural, that you might see in any individual or team who seriously commits 100% to the achievement of a long-range, worthwhile and valuable goal? Please note that last phrase, long-range, worthwhile and valuable. Long-range, worthwhile and valuable. Once a person locks their mind onto a long-range, worthwhile and valuable goal, the moment they make that decision, you see changes in their psychology. Now I've got 1, 2, 3 behind me. I wonder if you would maybe write down 3 things that change about a person's psychology the moment they decide that they're going to achieve something. So let's just say, for example, you know somebody who's entering the London Marathon. It's the first time they've been accepted into the London Marathon and they're determined to get a personal best. The day they receive their admission letter and the day they decide for real that they're going to do their best and get a personal best, things change for that person in terms of their psychology. Other things change the moment they commit. So could you please just write down maybe 3 emotions or changes that you would see in a person the day or even the moment they commit to a goal? Got anything coming in? Could you call it out, please?
Ready now?
Yes, please.
Okay, we've got from Krishna, number 1, excited, number 2, motivated, number 3, focused.
Yes.
We have from Emma, they have a focus, the team will be on the same page, mindset, confidence and committed. Krishna has said, more purposeful all actions and choices in life. We've got achievement, confidence, motivation to achieve more from Frozaina. Driven to achieve, and lastly John, confidence, positive, focused.
Wonderful. All these wonderful things. You get focus, enthusiasm, you become a time manager because now certain things on the agenda do correlate with your goal and certain things do not, and therefore you become a better time manager. You're motivated, you're enthusiastic, and the other thing is you're happier. It's interesting that happiness is associated strongly to striving to achieve the goal. In fact, when you achieve the goal, people who achieve the goal sometimes go into a dip the day after they've achieved it. So for example, astronauts who come back from the moon go into an emotional dip after they've achieved their goal. Now why would that be? It's obvious, they've lost their goal. They've achieved their goal, but they've lost their goal by achieving it. So NASA had to make sure that their astronauts, when they came back for the moon, were immediately given new career goals. You see, if they weren't going back to the moon, they'd have to have a new career goal to replace the big goal of going to the moon, which had occupied their mind for the last 10 years. So we must always be moving forward towards a better future. If we don't feel we're moving forward towards a better future, we go into a slight flatness or even a depression because we don't see no reason for the future to get better unless we're striving for goals. So I put up this statement behind me. This is a key statement. If you're making notes, would you please write this down? Strive to become a goal-focused individual. Strive to become a goal-focused individual. And if you want it as a negative, write not a drifter. Not a drifter. So now we're going to talk about goals. And I just want to make sure that we're on the same page about the word goal, what it means. Because I want to make a quick point, very quick point, about this. The difference between a wish and a goal. I'm on page 6 in the notes. Sometimes when I talk to people on the courses I do, I ask people what their goals are. And their responses makes me wonder if they actually know what they mean by the word goal. because I was talking to a group of people a couple of months ago, and I asked the group, I said to this gentleman, sir, could you tell me what your goal is? And he said, to win the national lottery. To win the national lottery is my goal. And I'm thinking, he doesn't even know what a goal is. That's a wish. Now, why is winning the national lottery, why is that not a goal? Well, because it doesn't rely on his performance. It's just pure chance. So you can't really say that my goal is something that I'm going to rely on. It's got nothing to do with my performance. So winning the national lottery can't be a goal. It's got to be a wish. So I've got on page 6, what is the difference between a wish and a goal? Well, a wish can be any flight of fantasy. You can fantasize anything you like when you're wishing, but goals are more substantial. Goals are to be taken seriously. Goals have a definite effect on the psychology, whereas wishes can be fairly kind of ephemeral, just passing the time, wishing your day. So we're talking about goals. Now, the way to talk about goals is through something that you already know. So when you see what I'm going to do next, you will already recognize it, but you won't recognize it in the way that I mean it, because I believe that the way people understand this thing is still in itself insufficient. Now, the thing which I think you already know is SMART targets. SMART targets. Could you please put me on drawer? In the book, I'm on page 9. Now, SMART targets is a very common model. Most people have heard of it. I'm assuming that you have, but you might not have. SMART targets is obviously a 5-part model, and I've got it as specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-driven. Now, most people know it on that level, but I believe it's insufficient to know it on that level, and ironically it's insufficient because it's too abstract. It's not specific enough, ironically, that the SMART target model isn't specific enough, because the S is about being specific. Now, if I can please refer you to page 9 in the book, you can see that there's lots of detail from the SMART target missing. So what I'd like to do is draw on my pad, and I'm going to ask you to follow me and write in the missing details, and we're going to elaborate this, and we're going to end up with something called 8-part SMART. 8-part SMART. Now, on that little bar that goes in, that first block, where it says, what is your goal? Could you write the number 1? The first question that you should ask anybody is, what is your goal? Now, when you ask people what their goal is, almost inevitably, they will answer your question in what I call loose language. Now, loose language is everyday language. It's language which can easily be misinterpreted. I want to set you up with a phrase here. Can you write this down? Words which are often used but ill-defined. Words and phrases which are often used but ill-defined, and there's thousands of them. So, for example, if you asked me what my goal was, I might say to you, to get in shape. To get in shape. Now, what's wrong with the phrase, to get in shape? Or I might say to you that my goal is to be more successful, which it is. It's everybody's. I want to get in shape and be more successful. Everybody says that. It's a legitimate goal, but what's wrong with the wording? Answer, it's too vague. It's too loose. So what we need to do is to take their original answer to question 1 and make it more specific. Now, specific on the diagram breaks into 2 sets. Can you see that? It goes like this. So what we do now is we have to make the answer more specific, And the first way of doing that, could you write a number 2 here and then write the word numbers? Numbers here. So you take their original answer and you try to make it numerical. You ask them to put numbers on their original answer. Now numbers might be a percentage, it might be a range, it might be a definite amount of money or a definite amount of weight, but you're trying to make it objectively measurable, because we're going to use the M in a minute. You're going to use numerical values. So let's just say, for example, I'm using getting in shape as my example. I say to you that my goal is to get in shape. Question: what numerical things could we use to clarify the meaning of the term to get in shape? You know, what questions would you ask me in order to clarify my meaning of get in shape? And when I say questions, what numerically based questions? Well, you might, of course, start by saying, well, when you say get in shape, do you mean lose weight or gain weight? He says, I want to lose weight. And you say, well, what weight are you now? He says, 14.5 stone. What weight do you want to be? 14 stone, you said. So what are your calories? What's your calorie intake? He says, I don't know what my calorie intake is. You say, well, count. A person your size, what's your basal metabolic rate? Do you know that? He says, no, I don't know. Well, find out what's your basal metabolic rate and how many calories do you need to maintain weight? How many calories would you therefore need to lose weight? Because you need to have a deficit of 500 calories a day in order to lose £1 a week. You see? And it's all about the math. It's all about the math. So the first thing to do with the other person's answer is to turn it into math, if you can. In other words, mathematics is terrific. You can do a lot with maths. You can do a lot with numbers. So when somebody gives you a goal, the answer to the goal, and they give it to you in loose language, the first step to take is to see if you can make it numerical. Now, next point. You can't make everything numerical, because there are many concepts in any language which are more philosophical. They are not amenable to mathematics. Things like justice, things like fairness, things like self-esteem. I mean, if the person said, I want to have more self-esteem, you can't say how many kilos of self-esteem do you want. Doesn't make sense. So can we now move to this one, point number 3. Can you write this phrase, please? Define your key terms. Define your key terms. Now, there are thousands upon thousands of concepts which are very abstract, and they are words which have multiple possible meanings. And because the same word has multiple possible meanings, when you say these words, the other person doesn't quite understand what you mean, but they think they do, you see. I'll give you an example. Fairness. Fairness or fair. Now, on one level, we're all agreed, aren't we? We all agree that we should treat people fairly. We're all agreed that we shouldn't treat people unfairly. So if we're all agreed on fairness, how come everybody argues over fairness? If we're all agreed on it? And of course the answer is that fairness is a very abstract concept, and it doesn't have one meaning, it has multiple possible meanings. Because if you ask different people their interpretation of the word fairness, you're going to get different answers from different people, or even sometimes different answers from the same person on a different day. So for example, if you ask people try the experiment, ask people what they understand by the word fairness. Some people say it means treating people the same. A lot of people say that. It means treating people the same. Everybody should get the same. Another person says absolutely not should they get the same. You should treat people as individuals. Can't pay people the same. They're not doing the same job. So we treat people as individuals, and you reward them according to their individual performance. That's what another person would say. And another person would say, well, I believe that fairness is treating people according to their individual need, according to their need. Have you heard the phrase, from each according to their ability and to each according to their need? That's another version of fairness. And another person says, well, I think we should treat people the way that we would like to be treated ourselves. That's so-called golden rule version of fairness. Have you heard of that one? And another person who's religious might say, well, I believe in the Holy Bible, and fairness is really the application of the Ten Commandments. And another person says, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm a Muslim. And another person says, well, I'm not religious at all. So we all go off in different directions, all based upon the same word of fairness. I'll give you another example, one that occurs in my industry. The phrase, could you write down appropriate dress? Appropriate dress. So I do training at the hotel. All the delegates have had the same email. It says, when you go to the course, you're representing the business, would you please make sure that you go appropriately dressed to the meeting? Now, when the delegates walk in, I'm surprised, because it doesn't look like they've had the same email, because some people are walking in with three-piece suits and the person behind them has got a t-shirt on with a skull on the front. Now, they've all had the same email, please go to the meeting appropriately dressed, and yet you get a wide variety of interpretations of the same message. Why is that? And whose fault was it? Well, it was the fault of whoever wrote that message, because appropriate dress is not sufficient. There's all kinds of words that fall into this category of often used but ill-defined. I'll give you one more. Professional. Attitude. See, everybody agrees that we should have a professional attitude, but that's a hugely abstract concept. It needs to be specifically defined. Now, here's the question that everybody should learn. And the question is this: when you say that, whatever that was, what do you mean specifically? Now, that question you should be using every single day, both in terms of asking it of other people and being ready to answer it if it's coming to you. So if I say something and the delegate says, when you say purpose, what do you mean specifically? The one of two things will happen. I will either give a definition or I'll fail to. Now, it only works out well if you are able to give definitions. What if you say you believe in fairness? And then someone challenges you and says, when you say fairness, what do you mean specifically? And you can't come up with a plausible definition of fairness, because it's not easy. You say, I know what I mean, but I can't explain it, you see. That's the best you can come up with. I know what I mean, but I can't explain it. Well, you fail to come up with a definition. What happens to your credibility as a communicator if you're unable to define your key terms? You see, you must be able to define your key terms. Because if you fail to define your key terms, your thinking is awry, your language is out, and you can't persuade anybody, least of all yourself. So this issue, at point 3 on the SMART target map, opens the door to an enormous amount of material that I wish we had more time to discuss how to define and specify abstract meanings which come up every single day. Things like efficiency, things like sustainable, things like fair, things like justice, things like a proper education for our kids. Oh, and here's another word that we need to define: risk. I mean, that's a big concept. Now, it's important that we do define, because we have to measure. We have to measure, and that's the second one down. It says specific, then measure. Now on the bar, could you write the word feedback? Write the word feedback. Now you know that feedback is part of the success formula. Do you remember purpose, plan, action, feedback, change? So in order to set a goal, we have to decide in advance what are going to be the feedback measures. This is question 4. Because at any moment in time, the actions that you're taking will take one of these 3 paths. So you can see 1, 2, 3 on the diagram there. At any moment in time, you will either be making progress. Could you write the words making progress? That means making progress towards your goal, or not making progress, which is a form of negative feedback. Making progress is obviously a form of positive feedback. Not making progress is a form of negative feedback, which is pretty bad. But what's worse than not making any progress whatsoever? There's something worse than that, isn't there? Yeah, going backwards. That's what's worse. Now you might say going backwards. I usually do. I say go backwards. Backwards. But if you want to maintain your language, it would be regress. So at any moment of time, everybody's either making progress, not making progress, or going backwards. They're making progress, not making progress, or regress. Now the point about feedback is it's an active process. Here's a phrase I want to warn you of. Sometimes people say no news is good news. Have you heard that phrase? No news is good news. Well, no news is not good news. No news is no news. So if somebody doesn't tell you anything, that doesn't mean that they're doing well, because it could be that they haven't made any progress or they're going backwards. So you can't rely on people to tell you the feedback unless you ask them. You've got to, like I say, feedback is an active process. You've got to go out and get it. So you've got to know whether the person is making progress, not making progress, or going backwards. And you can't rely on the adage, no news is good news. Now we've got achievable and realistic. Now many people say, isn't this the same thing twice? Isn't achievable realistic and isn't realistic achievable? And I say, well, actually, you've got a point. Maybe it is. So what we'll do is we'll separate it. We'll make achievable and not achievable. We'll take the A and we'll make this denote the word abilities. Now this denotes everything inside the human mind. So inside the human mind there's a brain, you see. And abilities denote the things that a person's got in their mind. The goal is achievable to the degree to which this person has the cognitive ability. Now, what I mean by cognitive ability here are 3 things. Skills, knowledge, and experience. Skills, knowledge, and experience. All encoded into the human mind. To the degree to which the person does have the skill, does have the knowledge, does have the experience, is the degree to which they are likely to achieve their goal. And to the degree to which it's missing, is the degree to which they are unlikely to achieve their goal. Now that's question 5. Question 6. We take the word realistic and now we make this denote everything outside of the human mind. So we divide the universe into 2 sets. Everything inside the brain and everything outside the brain. Now, achievable is the abilities inside the brain. Realistic are the resources. Could you write the word resources? Outside of the mind. Everything around you. Everything around us. Now, on the 3 bars, let's write down the key resources available, or what we need. First one, top of the list, technology as a resource. Obviously, my presentation now is relying on technology. If the technology fails on me, it's gone. So We rely on technology nowadays, so technology is a major resource. Number 2, could you write money? Obviously, financial resources are a massive impact on your ability to achieve goals, because most goals that you want to achieve will take some form of financial investment. Where are we going to get the money from? And the last one, could you write the word people? That's friends, that's help. Sometimes it's called the human resource. In fact, frequently it's called the human resource. Now that's question 7. And now you might tell me that the ultimate resource is time. So that's the T, time. And what we want here is, I think I messed my numbers up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's number 6. There we are. That's number 6. I thought I messed up there. There's my 6. Now time, could you write the word deadline? Now we need to know what is the deadline pressure for this goal. We have to put a deadline on it. You know, if you're doing the marathon occurs on a certain date. You have to put a deadline on it, because if you don't put a deadline on it, the temptation will be to procrastinate. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll start my diet tomorrow, that type of thing. So people have a tendency to procrastinate. So it's almost imperative that you put at least some kind of deadline when you're intending to achieve a certain stage of development. Failure to put a deadline will probably throw this off track completely. Now, on the 3 bars here, on the top one, could you write the word clear? Now, that means that the deadline should be clearly communicated, and put a 7 there. This is the point we're making. The deadline should be clearly communicated to everybody who is in on the goal. Everybody needs to know. If the deadline is not clearly communicated to everybody who needs to know, some people won't act. They will procrastinate, because people like to procrastinate. On the next one down, could you write the words rational and the word logical? Now, this is where the deadline is coming from. We have to have a rational and logical assessment of all the available evidence, which allows us to create the deadline. Now, the deadline is not the result of a wish. It's not the result of a guess. It's not the result of a promise or a prayer. The deadline is none of these things. The deadline is the fruits of a rational and logical evaluation of all the available evidence. That's where my deadline came from. It wasn't a hope, you see. It was a rational and logical evaluation of all the available evidence. I'll say that one more time in case you're writing it down. The deadline is coming from a rational and logical evaluation of all the available evidence. It isn't a guess or a hope. And now, underneath rational logical, could you write the word optimistic? Optimistic. And then could you put, I'm going to change colour for this because I want to make a play on this. 8. When you have got your deadline as a rational, logical evaluation of all the available evidence, you sprinkle on a bit of optimism. You put on a little bit of optimism. But I want to draw your attention to the relationship between reason, logic, and optimism. You must not allow the optimism to override reason. You must not allow your optimism to become illogical, i.e., your optimism is bounded by reason. I call myself a rational optimist. I'll say that again, it's a nice phrase. I'm a rational optimist. I used to be a blind optimist. I used to think, oh, don't worry, everything will be fine. But I was just going on hope, you see. I hope everything's going to be fine. Rational optimism is you put your reason first and then you sprinkle optimism on the top. Now, it's very important that you get the relationship between positive mental attitude and optimism and reason in the right way round. Rational optimism is in the correct order. Now, let me give you just a word on this. if you are giving somebody a delegated task, you're fine up to point 8. But then when you tell them the deadline, the other person honestly believes that that deadline you've given them is over optimistic. It's over optimistic. It's unreasonably optimistic. Now, if you go and press down on that person's mind and say, I understand you think it's over optimistic, do it anyway, and you just effectively discount their objection, what happens to the motivation of the person who's getting a job, but the deadline seems to be so over optimistic, so unreasonable, that it just doesn't seem possible to them? What is the emotional response to that? Well, of course, the answer is they cut off. They cut off from the whole project. They shrug their shoulders and they say, this guy is a clown. He's giving me deadlines which don't even add up, you see. So you must be very careful that when you're giving people deadlines and they express some kind of reasonable objection that the deadline is unreasonable, then you've got to take that seriously, because if you just press down and insist upon it, you disconnect that person from their motivation. I call it, you break them on the rule of reason. Now, we have 8 questions which are now memorizable. The 8 success formula questions, and they're memorizable. They are: what is the goal? How do you define that goal numerically? How do you define your key terms at point 3? What is the feedback measure at point 4? How will we know whether we're making progress, not making progress, or going backwards? What abilities do we need? Skills, knowledge and information. What resources do we need? Technology, money and people. What time do we need? What is the deadline? Has it been properly communicated? And is the deadline the result of a rational and logical evaluation of all the evidence? And are the other people convinced of that? They just believe it to be optimistic, but not over optimistic. Now, these questions are memorizable. I've got them on page 11 of the notes. If you go to page 11 of the notes, you can see the questions. Now, I'm just going to pause my presentation because I've got a scruffy diagram behind me, the one I've just drawn. But I just want to pause my presentation whilst you look at page 11. And could you please just confirm that that list on page 11 with the card on it is actually the same information as my scruffy mind map that's behind me? I'll pause my presentation and I'll just ask you to verify that's true. Would you please put me on PowerPoint? I'm assuming that you agree that's true. Okay, now, if you look behind me, you'll see the smarter version of the scribble diagram I just drew. There it is in full. May I please refer you to page 12 in the notes? Page 12. I'd like to ask you a question. This diagram here, the way it's formed here, it's a very useful diagram. It's a derivative of the 5-part SMART. But now we've turned it into 8 questions rather than specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time driven. It's 8 questions. But if you look at the end piece, it's more than 8. It's quite a sophisticated diagram now. Now, I wouldn't recommend you try to memorize the whole thing on the right hand side of the screen, but you can remember the 8 questions because they're easily memorizable, and all the derivatives then just come as a matter of common sense. But the question I'd like to ask you on page 12 of the notes is, you can use that diagram in multiple ways. The same diagram can be used in multiple contexts. So can I ask you please to write down 3 different ways in which that same diagram could be used by you, by your friends, by anyone else. I'm just going to pause my presentation. We're on page 12. The question is 3 ways that you could use that same model. Okay, I'm hoping that somebody will either come online and talk to us, or you type something in. 3 ways in which you can use that same model.
Okay, I got
That's
for
right.
Zaina. Number 1, work goals. Number 2, personal goals. And number 3, family goals.
Perfect. Your own goals, your family goals, your work goals. And then going back to work, you can use it as staff appraisals. Either if you're doing the staff appraisal with another colleague, you can help the other person to set their personal development goals. Or if you're going into the staff appraisal, you would already equip yourself with a list of professional goals which you would like to present to the HR manager. But it's done in such a methodical way that it covers all of its bases. You see, the 8 questions would always have a plausible answer. Now I'd like to draw your attention now in the last couple of minutes to the top end of the model. The idea of being more specific. Can I please ask you to go back to page... I've got to find it now. Could you please go to page 10? Just going to do a little exercise in specificity. I'm on page 10. What is the... this is about the use of numbers and being specific. What is the best and the easiest way to improve the accuracy of your language? Answer, use numbers. The use of numerals is the easiest and the most effective way to improve your clarity. Why? Because using numbers introduces exact quantities, exact times. They carry more specific information. Numbers improve the quantitative nature of your language. They make it less prone to interpretation. Look at the following 7 statements. They've got a problem. They're all too vague. So I'm going to ask you to go through the questions 1 to 7. And what question would you ask if the person said these statements? Now, most of them are numerical, but there are a few ones in there where you can't use numbers. You're going to have to go for definitions. So we're going to throw in the issue of definitions into this. Just for an example, if the person says respect, you see at point 2, it's difficult to put a number on respect. So you'd have to jump to the point 3 and go for the definition. You'd have to ask, when you say respect, how are you defining that term, you see? But I'm just going to pause my presentation. The general question is, what would you say next if the person with you says any of these 7 things? What is your question, your clarification question? Yeah. Let's do this for 5 minutes and then I go to the balance. Okay, would you put me back on? Okay, shall we just do this together? We're running low on time, I've only got 10 minutes. let's look at this first one. I would like to lose weight as soon as possible. Well, the first thing I'd like to draw your attention here is the phrase as soon as possible. I'd like to make a play on this. As soon as possible for me is bad speech. It's bad language. Because have you ever used the word as soon as possible or ASAP or ASAP? When you're at work, please don't use the words ASAP or ASAP or as soon as possible without a number attached. Because if you say, could you please send me those documents as soon as possible, something's gone wrong. Because when you said as soon as possible, you probably meant by the end of the day or something like that. But if that's all you say, as soon as possible, the other person will take that on face value and say, well, as soon as possible for me, it happens to be 3 weeks. So you should never use the phrase as soon as possible. And as soon as you hear anyone else use the phrase as soon as possible, you ask them for the number that goes with it. So if I say, could you send me those documents as soon as possible, you would say, when you say as soon as possible, could you be a bit more specific? Do you mean, when do you mean? Put the number on it. And I'd say 6 o'clock. And you say 6 o'clock today, tomorrow? And I'd say 6 o'clock today. And now you got it, you see. So I want to warn you off that phrase as soon as possible at point 1. And then, of course, if he says to lose weight, we've already talked about that. Now, respect at point 2, difficult to do with numbers. You're going to have to use that earlier phrase I gave you. When you say respect, Chris, what do you mean specifically? You see, you can't assume that your interpretation of the word respect is identical to the other person's. So any abstract phrase like respect, or justice, or fairness, or sustainable, all of these highly abstract terms have to be defined by point 3, give a proper definition. I want to get in shape, we've already done that one. I'd like to be richer, point 4. Well, you know the answer to that one. What's the question we should ask? How much richer? I mean, how much are you earning now? How much richer is richer? Because otherwise you could toss £5 across the table and say, congratulations, you've achieved your goal. But he probably didn't mean £5. So you need to get the specifics. I want to improve my work performance. Again, that's going to be a combination of definition and numbers. You can say, well, when you say work performance, could you be a little bit more specific and define your area of expertise you'd like to perform? Yeah, he says my sales performance. And then you would get down to the numbers about ratios, how many calls to how many appointments to how many sales, that type of thing. So it's all about numbers and it's all about definitions. I would like to be more successful. Hey, that's going to be a big question of definition. How do you define the word success? Everybody has their own definition of the word success. For example, my mother thinks that she's successful to the degree to which she doesn't spend money. So she doesn't earn much, she doesn't want much. She's happy, but she doesn't have any money, and she thinks that's terrific. She thinks that's very spiritual. So successful doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to you that it means to my mother or anyone else. Go along here for a bit and turn left at the junction. Well, you can see the problematic part of that sentence. It's for a bit. You see, for a bit is completely unspecified. You'd have to say, when you say for a bit, could you be a little bit more specific? Could you give me a number? And he says, yeah, about 20 meters. Now you've got the answer, you see. So we can't allow ourselves to use what I call loose language. But the most important thing about communication is accuracy and definition, because you need to be clearly understood. I'll say that again. We need to be clearly understood. Now I've got 5 minutes left. I'd just like to make an important point, which is all the things we've been talking about today have been kind of work related. But success doesn't necessarily mean just work-related success. What we're looking for is something broader than just work success. I make a distinction between standard of living and quality of life. If you want to write that down, that's a good distinction. Standard of living versus quality of life. Standard of living pertains to money and career, that type of thing. That's going to give you a certain standard of living, but it's possible in chasing standard of living to lose quality of life, and many people do. So when we're talking about goals, you need goals in all areas of your life, not just one or two. We need to make sure that we are in balance on every level. Now, so you wanted to, when I say you want to, we want to break our lives down into subsets and make sure that nothing is neglected for very long. Now, I've broken it down on page 15. Now, this is just a suggestion of how a person might break their lives down into subset parts. This is how I might do it. Work, obviously I'm at work now. Hobbies, I lift weights. Rest and recuperation, you've got to go to sleep, you've got to rest, you've got to recuperate, you've got to be fit and healthy. Family life, assuming that you're interested in romantic love with your partner. Health and vitality, we want to live a long time and prosper. Further education, we read. And whatever you've got at point 8 other. Because, you might be religious, so a relationship with God might be an important thing for you. You might be not religious, but you might be more social, so you want to do some social work for the needy, that type of thing. So the point is about life is that you should divide it into sets, into smaller sets, and make sure that everything on your plate has its own goal. So I have goals for my weightlifting, I have goals for my business, I have goals for my holiday, I've got goals for my kids, I've got goals for everything, goals for my guitar, and we want to be goal focused in all directions, including rest, because after all this goal focus chasing around, it's important to rest, recuperate, come back stronger tomorrow, have a nice breakfast, start work again, you see. So we're talking about balance. Success really, I've got the phrase, a sustainable equilibrium. We need to be in a sustainable equilibrium with our environment and with our friends. So let's just go through my notes here, see if there's anything I want to say at the end. Yeah, this might be worth writing down. We talk about specificity and definitions. The point is, if you're going into a meeting and it's going to be of something contentious like fairness, you need to have a definition of fairness. So here's a point you might want. Before the meeting, define your most important words and phrases to yourself. If you're going into a meeting and the issue is going to be, say, about fairness, the first thing that the other person's going to want to ask you is, what do you mean by fair? Now, fairness is a difficult concept. You need to define what you mean. Out of all those options, which one do you mean and how are you going to justify your claim? If you don't have the words in advance, you won't find them in the moment. So you'd expect me to have predicted what I'm going to say before I get here, and I did. It's much easier to predict what you're going to say and then say it later. Here's a question that you should ask. When you say that, what do you mean specifically? You should be asking that question practically every day rather than jumping to conclusions. And remember that the one with the clearest ideas has the advantage. I've got another phrase, which is, it's not enough to be right. You must be clear in your verbal expression. You must be able to explain yourself in clear and specific terms. Now I'm coming to the end. This is our success formula. This is the basis of what we've been using. Today we've been talking about clear purpose and smart targets. But these are the other things we've been talking about. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about success formula at point 1, planning at point 2, giving feedback at point 3, emotional management at point 4, goal setting at point 5, and I've just tagged a little bit on at the end relating to work-life balance. I've got a couple of minutes left. I've just got a minute to say, does anybody have a question that has been lingering or is it triggered in their minds? A little moment for questions if you do have one. Okay, I take that. Oh, is anything coming in? No, okay, I take that as a no. Thank you very much. Now, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you. I hope you've enjoyed the last hour and indeed the other hours that we've spent together. I've opened the door on certain things like communication skills and clarity of verbal expression, which I can only touch upon today. Goal setting, giving feedback, emotional management, time management, making decisions, all of these things. We've got a lot more to say than we can squeeze into an hour seminar. But if you would like some more information about further training, please do drop us a line, pick up the phone to talk to us, or look at the website and read the descriptions of the courses we've got available. I would very much like to meet you again, hopefully in person or maybe online. But until the next time we meet, I'll thank you again for your attendance and I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.